bonjour, wait, even, wait, regard. I'm just trying to, I've just decided that I'm probably going to try, Christ, I don't know how long it's going to take me, but I am going to try and learn Old English. Hunt is dog, dwarf is dwarf. I've learned that one. Stan is stone, Ethel Stan. But yeah, it's just quite interesting. Sinning is king. Yeah, I'm gonna just learn loads of vocabulary first of all, as much as I can, so that I can identify some words. But I'm doing this because of I believe that there have been some additions and some errors made within the translation of the Beowulf Manuscript, and the first one is on line 3, where it says Eithlinges el, and that has now been copied down as Eithlinges elen fremedon. And actually, like, looking up those words, Frey and Medon, there's no translation that like uses those words properly that I can see. Frey is free, and Medon is middle, and I'm wondering, I have no idea, they do use the term Middle Earth later on in Beowulf, but it seems like it's saying, if we look at it as it is, that it's saying the noble people of El free in Middle Earth, or free in the middle. Yeah, have you ever heard of that as the first 2 lines? Because that is like not what it's been translated as. So El, it's unfortunately the last E on El is right at the singed border of, so I don't know if anyone knows about this, but the Beowulf Manuscript was nearly consumed in a fire in a place called the Ashburnham House randomly, and yeah, it caught the edges of the manuscript. But what it looks like to me is that it sort of looks like there might be another letter after it. Might be, but there isn't. This is the important thing. And additionally, it also looks like somebody at some point has made annotations all over the, there's like a number above the first line, or like the second line. It's like, I can't remember, it says like 154 or something like that. I can't remember it exactly. But you can see also on the very borders of the annotations, you know, right on that singed border, somebody has penned in extra little letters. And I think, I don't know, but I think that they've done that as they were trying to determine what had been burnt off of the edge of the page. Obviously, if this was very simple, then everyone would have noticed it. But it looks to me like he has put the N, or the start of an N, because it's a slightly different shaded colour as well, so the annotations are made in a slightly blacker ink. I wonder if anyone's already had a look at all of this, but because there are documents that you can look at that show you what was changed, what's been amended, what's been added, but that line, it doesn't come up. But clearly there are amendments on that border, right where the burnt edge is. And the reason that that's important, it's very important, is that Eithlinges, so Eithling is like the noble son, Eithlinges is the noble people of El, and we know that AL is spelt in exactly the same way. There's no capital letter for his name. E is just a little E, and it's like L, like the magazine, you know, like feminine, but doesn't mean that at all. Elen means courage, greatness, strength. But it would have an entirely different meaning, that opening chapter, if you look at it with the noble people of El were free in Middle Earth, or free in the middle, Medon, often skilled skeefing. And we do know that the Scyldings were in a part of England, and that AL was in a part of England. And it makes sense with all of the characters that come later on, and the fact that we can track them all down to this etymological area surrounding Morling Hill. And yeah, the other big problem is the Hrethel. So that's been, so like I said, names don't have capital letters, so there is no big, you know, capital H before Hrethel. And I think that past researchers have looked at it and decided that that's a person. That's a like a name, like George or Tim or Ben or whatever. It's a name, but actually I think that Hrethel is a descriptive title, and it's the Aethel, or the High Aethel, or a Danish term for Aethel, Hrethel. And that's important because one other word is noted that it's taken in or omitted or put in. So like, and that is him, and it's quite critical because there's a whole line before this Hrethel reference that talks about Ectheo, and then it ends with that name Ectheo, which we know is a name. Then you full stop, and then it says him, Hrethel the Geat Man, and other translators have decided that there is no him there. It just says Hrethel the Geat Man gave to Beowulf his one and only daughter to his battle brave son. What I think it's talking about is that it comes to that end bit, Ectheo, and then it says him, he, the high noble, or the noble Hrethel, he, the high noble of the Geatmen, gave to Beowulf, Ectheo gave to Beowulf his one and only daughter to his battle brave son. We don't know if Egbert had a daughter, but we do know his son was Hygelac, and then we can link in all the other characters that are talked about after that: Ethelred, Herdred, Heribald, and Hæthcyn, who would have been Ethelbald, Ethelred, and Alfred the Great. And I think that these are Danish, kind of Anglo-Scandinavian titles used for those kings of the time. But those two things change the way we look at the entire text, and I don't think they've been addressed properly. And yeah, it'd be really interesting to know whether that is an addition on the end of Ella, because it literally says that. Then the noble people of Ael is what it says. It doesn't say the kings had strength and courage. It doesn't say that at all. It just says the noble people of El were free in the middle, often skilled skeefing. So it's like they're talking about the Scyldings in relation to an early Beowulf. And then we've got academics that have come to me saying, no, Beowulf wasn't a Scylding. Like, yes, he was. He's obviously distantly related to the Scyldings. There are different tribes of Scyldings all over the place. But yeah, clearly it states that the first skilled skeefing, shield sheathing, has a son called Beowulf. It's not the same Beowulf in this land. And for that, if we know that they're talking about AL, then we can bring that all into England. It's critical, utterly critical. And later on down in the text, it talks about Hygd arriving at Offa's Hall. Offa was alive in 750, and he also came just before Egbert, Alfred, Ethelbald, Ethelred. So that would make sense. Hygd would be Judith. And actually what's interesting is that directly after it's in the Noel Codex, it's the name for the sort of folio of works that have been put together, which include Beowulf. But the work that comes directly after Beowulf is called Judith, and it talks about this. It's very interesting. I don't think anyone's put this together yet, because I need to learn the tale of. There is a tale of Hygd. She's this like kind of brutal queen, but the story of Judith sort of implies that same story. But also the fact that when she marries Hygelac, Hygd, she's incredibly young. Winter's few she had seen within the castle courts. Haereth was her sire, but we know that Ethelwulf married Judith when she was 12. So it's another little cracking little clue. And Hygelac, again, I think is a title. They haven't got that name Ethelwulf in there for some reason, which is strange because they actually haven't used Aethel in the prefixes for the other things. They've used Herd and Hera. But yeah, these are, I'm not a Old English expert, but those, my observations have come across because I've actually been trying to read the text and make sense of it. Once I started thinking like, are these people those people, then I found that hymn reference. It's like, maybe this has been mistranslated. Maybe people have decided that Hrethel isn't a title, it's a name, and then it creates an absolutely separate character. Suddenly you've got Ectheo and Hrethel, but actually it's just a title that could be used for other people as well. Once Ecbert dies, then there's a new Hrethel, a new high noble or noble. I think these things are really important and worth looking at, because it will make sense of something that has been completely misconstrued. Understandably so. I understand how difficult it is. Nobody really has any there's no common consensus on what anything means in Old English by the look of it. There's some words that are known, like I did at the beginning, hunt and sinning, and we commonly agree that they mean dog and king, but there are others that people have no idea of, and the way in which the manuscript has been translated is totally different depending on which version of the translation you read. So like Seamus Heaney's is entirely different to Tolkien's, R.G. Falk's is entirely different to both of them. I wonder how much of it has come about from people trying to create an original version of it, that doesn't sound like the other one, or else they're going to get done for copy or something. But even the first word, wait, no one really has agreed what that is. And I kind of look at words as a sort of layman and just think, quait sounds very much like our modern word for wait. So I would, in my looking at it, as a trying to create a call for attention at the beginning of this narrative, that I would say that it means stop, regard, take heed. So stop, take heed of the tales of the Spear Danes, and that's how I'd start it, which again is totally different, but I don't know where the roots of wait and all those, but perhaps nobody else does either, because it's so some people have started wait as listen, or lo, or so the Spear Danes, but these are all the professional academics, so there is no consensus on that particular word, let alone God knows how many others, or in the way in which it's been construed by us today. But yeah, this is important because it does change the story, and it's not, I feel like it's a bit, the problem I have with all of this is that for me to be right, it means that every single academic that has come before has got it wrong, and I'm certain that is the case, but it's I'm not attacking them, but they're taking it that way. If all of your research and everything has led you to this place where you're I'm very well versed in this thing now, with this subject of Beowulf, I understand all the characters and I understand where they are and all that kind of stuff, when someone comes along and tries, it's almost effectively like pulling the rug out from under their feet, then suddenly you're going to defend it or be quiet. Most of what I've received is no defence, because there really is very little. If you even look at the Kleber version of Beowulf, the one that everybody seems to have used for the kind of authoritative source, all the arguments that talk about why it might have happened in Sweden, which I don't believe is true. I think it happened in Sussex. The Geats, the Scyldings were in Sussex, as well as in Gotaland and in Gotland and in Frisia, where Finn is. They're all over the place, and they were travelling between each other, which would make sense. Which would also mean, especially if it's coming around at 800s, we know the Vikings were starting to attack then. We know that there were big sea journeys being made. One of the answers was it would take 2 days to cross a lake in Sweden on a boat of the time in the 600s, which is when they're implying it is, and they're talking about over the water wide, all these different references, and I'm AL made the journey in the 400s across the sea, so we know they were already doing those sea journeys the Danish coming to the southern shores. We know he settled in Sussex. You know, they didn't just magically appear here via teleporter. So, you know, they could sail across oceans in that time, and to sail across the ocean, it would take a couple of days, probably from south of Sweden, or even from Gotland. If you look at like sailing distance calculators, don't know how fast their boats were in the day, but it would have taken a couple of days, and that's what it says in the Beowulf Manuscript. At the appropriate time on the second day, the sun's to the right or something like that. It's kind of implying that, you know, it's a couple of days journey, but they could have made it, and they were making it at that particular time. Yeah, I could go into far more detail, but yeah, we need to just use, like, if you can just kind of get the idea that Ael is the first person they're talking about in there, and that it's his sons, that, you know, ancestors that are being spoken about as well, and that Geatland, not Gotaland or Gotland, was in the south of England, in Sussex, and there are etymological echoes to the Beowulf story in Ringmer, Ringhamor. Again, there was a battle of Ringmere, and it used to be called Ringmere, and the people of Ael are on the field in that battle. Ringmere is right next to Morling Hill, which has been proposed as a place of Ael's. So has Morling, and that was a church was gifted to Canterbury in 690, the Church of Morling, by Egbert. Then we've got Offa's Hall down in Beddingham. We also know that King Alfred had that. There's talks of like King Alfred in Alfriston, you know, references of him there. Then you've got like all the later kings being there, Henry III, Edward Longshanks. They were there for the Battle of Lewes later on, so this is like royal zone. And you've got charters talking about Beowulf, who's followed by Wiglaf in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle a year later. There's a guy called Ludican in the middle. But yeah, this is the real story of Beowulf. It's talking about, and when it says there was hate and strife betwixt Swede and Geat, and feud on either hand across the water wide, they're literally talking about the Vikings coming across to fight the English Geats, the Danes that have settled in England, and that's where we get Alfred. That's the reason that he's Haethcyn. It's because it means Sin is king, C-Y-N, Haeth is heath, you know, or other people have decided it's wasteland or wilderness, but heathland basically. And if you know anything about Alfred the Great, we know that when the Vikings came over, they took over most of the country. He was a king of the wasteland at one point, last bit, and then he took the country back, which is why he got the name Great. Anyway, I just thought I'd try and explain all of those little critical, tiny little bits of detail that make a huge difference. And until anybody can categorically tell me that what I have just said is absolutely not right, there is too much evidence for the events of the tale, especially when he comes back. So I think Gotland is where Hrothgar is, and Hrothgar is a man called Hemming, and later in the text of Beowulf it talks about Hemming. Verily he of Hemming's race made light of that, yea, men at their ale drinking further remarked that less injuries to men she wrought, less cruel wickedness, since first she arrived at Offa's Hall, over the wan waters wandering. And that's talking about Hygd coming across, and then she marries Hygelac, and I think that's Judith coming across, and she marries Ethelwulf. And all of these people surround the life of Beowulf and Wiglaf. And in Beowulf, it's Beowulf and Wiglaf. Couldn't be any more clear in my mind. But there are also other things like Gota Lane in Ringmer. Gota is the Swedish version of Geat. Beowulf is a Geat. Old Hag Woods. Old Hag Woods is an old hag, as is Grendel's mother. And then there's a charter of Ethelstan that says go eastward from Ham. Hamsey, H-A-M-M-E-S is the exact spelling that's used in the charter. And that eastward from Ham to the boundary of Beow's home, and then on to Grendel's Gatam later on. Like, there are rather a lot of these references that help us pin it down right into Hamsey, Ham Ed Law, and now that charter's been attributed to a place called Hames in Wiltshire, where no Wittans were held, and and where the spelling is different to the spelling in the charter, which is the same spelling as the Ham et Law, Ham and Lewis, and we know it's that particular Ham. But then also, just coincidentally, eastward from Ham, just as it says in the charter, there are all these etymological echoes and references. And there's places like, there's also an Anglo-Scandinavian burial ground. Viking marauders were found on the hill. There's an Anglo-Saxon settlement site there. One of the great old treasures was a glass armlet that came out of this burial ground when this road was just ploughed through at Earwig Corner during the time of Gideon Mantle. They found some incredible things, and he actually sold some to the British Museum for £5 back in the day. It's like mad. It's all in his autobiography, I think. But they also found a glass Roman armband thing, and that was utterly unique. And that was given to the British Museum, but it's disappeared now apparently. Like, no one knows where that is. But there were also loads of other Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-Scandinavian burials found there, swords. It's an important site. And it ties in perfectly to this whole era of Beowulf. I didn't originally start off this video thinking about talking about that, but yeah, I'd just like to recap everything I know. I've got to do a talk on all of this, and I'm going to really be concentrating solely on the what I've kind of gone over today, but mostly to do with the charters that talk about bringing them into the Ouse Valley, where you have a charter of Beowulf at Cloveshow, a lost meeting place of Anglo-Saxon kings, which was Hamsey Church, but people haven't heard me yet. They haven't heard or listened to what I'm saying about that yet. But that is Cloveshow. Beowulf is there. He's talking about Beddingham and Denton, and he talks about Offa, and it's a land dispute to do with the church and somebody else. I can't remember exactly what the charter exactly details, but all those things are in there, and they're all in the Ouse Valley, and they all lead up to Hamsey Church. And if you come in at the old New Haven entrance, which would have actually been near a Seaford during his day, and you keep going down that Ouse Valley, you end up at Hamsey Church, where we know King Ethelstan held a Witan of his own in 925, which is interesting. So, yeah, and we also know that it's called Old St. Peter's Church, but we also know that Beowulf built a church for St. Peter, and that's been, for some reason, attributed to somewhere in Gloucester. I have no idea who came up with that, but equally the Battle of Ashdown has been placed somewhere else. So has the Battle of Heathfield, but we have Ashdown Forest, Heathfield. That was suddenly changed to Hatfield Chase for some reason by somebody. There's a lot of strange things. There's another battle site called Terrible Down on the road near Halland, which is another place quite close to Ringmer, but also it's the name of the old province of Kattegat in the south of Sweden. And then there's another place called Håloland, which is obviously Hall land. That may be where it came from. And then there's another place called Harlinges. Harlinges is an existing place in Friesland, and it's where Finn goes. I think in the Beowulf Manuscript it says something about him not being able to go home because the seas are too rough, basically, so he has to wait. And I'm wondering if that's where this whatever the name was I just said, so much bloody information. It's just disappeared from my brain. Anyway, that's probably an awful lot to have absolutely destroyed people's brains with, so I'll leave you with that stuff for now. And yeah, see if there is anyone out there that like really does understand. I've got to basically put my faith in the fact that if I ask this question to the person who looks after the manuscript, am I going to get a truthful answer when their whole livelihoods and their whole faith in the whole thing depends on me being wrong? Am I going to get a truthful answer? And this is the bit where I'm like, you know, that's why I keep thinking, I keep meeting with silence. It's because they can't argue against it. There's no evidence. They have to imagine it. It's like, from what I can see, there is no N, and yet they've decided that there is an N for some reason at the end of L. Now, I'm looking at it, the physical evidence shows us there is no N there right now. But I have to argue against something that isn't there, that now they're all going to be saying, yeah, but it is there though. Like, definitely would be. I know that word is used later on down the line in the text quite a lot. It's used about another sort of 5 or 6 times. LN is, but not L. And yeah, it's kind of critical that I really do think that is very important. And how many people have translated that text from the original, not from what Claver decided was what it said, and how many of those little annotations have changed the meaning from its original version, which is the honest original version. Now this is why I want to learn Old English, is because I'm going to eventually like literally just translate it word for word as it is, not add in any, literally just translate it and then see how that reads. That would be interesting. But anyway, that's like a very long video. I had a very long journey to do then, but yeah, quite tired. But hopefully people will listen to this and we'll see what they make of it. But yeah, it's the academics that really understand Beowulf that might have a better chance at kind of like looking at all of this. Yeah, I wish they'd be as excited as I am, but you know, they just seem to want to be defending the old position rather than actually looking at the possibility that I might have been wrong.